Over 60, top 6 morning foods to keep your eyes young and clear. What if I told you that 99% of people over 60 are eating breakfast all wrong, and it's silently stealing their eyesight? That's right, most seniors believe that blurry nights, trouble reading, or cataracts are just part of aging. But let me tell you, as someone who's spent decades studying eye health in older adults, that's a myth. The shocking truth is this: your eyesight doesn't have to fade just because the candles on your birthday cake keep adding up. In fact, science now shows us that the difference between clear, sharp vision and years of frustrating decline often comes down to what you eat first thing in the morning. Not a pill, not a surgery, food. Real, everyday food. And here's the kicker: you've probably walked past these vision-saving foods hundreds of times at the grocery store without realizing they can act like natural medicine for your eyes. Imagine being able to drive confidently at night, read the fine print without squinting, or look into your grandchild's eyes and see every detail of their smile, all because of a few smart choices on your breakfast plate. Surprising, isn't it? Now, I know some of you might be skeptical. Maybe you've heard, "It's just genetics," or "There's nothing you can do." But here's where the research proves otherwise. These 6 morning foods are backed by powerful scientific evidence, and I've seen them transform the lives of my own patients. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to eat to keep your eyes young and clear for decades to come. But before we dive into the details, do me a quick favor: hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Every single click gives us the motivation to keep bringing you real, life-changing health tips you won't find anywhere else. All right, let's get started, and trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because the last food on this list is one most people never think about, yet it might be the most powerful protector of your eyesight. The aging eye explained. Your eyes are like tiny cameras, always on, always working. From the moment you wake up until you fall asleep, they are processing light, color, depth, and motion. They are among the most energy-hungry organs in your body, and that constant demand comes at a cost as the years add up. Aging eyes face 3 major challenges. First, oxidative stress builds up over time. Every flash of sunlight, every bit of pollution you breathe in, even normal metabolism, all of it creates unstable molecules called free radicals. Without enough antioxidants from your diet to neutralize them, these free radicals damage delicate cells in the retina. Second, there is inflammation. It's slow and silent, but it gradually weakens the tiny blood vessels that supply your eyes. Over time, this low-grade inflammation quietly chips away at the structures that keep your vision clear. Third, circulation begins to decline. Stiffer blood vessels mean less oxygen and fewer nutrients reach the retina, which is one of the most metabolically active tissues in the body. Imagine running a marathon while breathing through a straw. That's what your eyes are up against when blood flow isn't optimal. These changes explain why certain conditions become so common after 60. Macular degeneration, the leading cause of vision loss, damages the center of the retina. It starts small, maybe a blurry spot when reading, but can eventually make it difficult to recognize faces or drive. According to the CDC, nearly 20 million Americans are living with some form of it right now. Cataracts, which cloud the eye's lens and make the world look foggy, affect more than half of all Americans by the time they turn 80. And then there's glaucoma, often called the silent thief of sight. It damages the optic nerve without early warning, and more than 3 million Americans live with it today. So here's the question I ask my own patients: if you knew that simple daily choices could protect your vision, would you make them? The good news is that science says yes, you can protect your eyes. The landmark ARD study, funded by the National Eye Institute, showed that targeted nutrients, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, copper, lutein, and zeaxanthin, could cut the risk of advanced macular degeneration by up to 25%. That's not a small number. That's a game changer for millions of older adults. And you don't need a bottle of pills to get these nutrients. They're right there in everyday foods waiting to be part of your breakfast. I often tell my patients to think of their eyes like gardens. If you ignore them, weeds like oxidative stress and inflammation take over. But if you feed them consistently with the right nutrients, you give them what they need to thrive for years to come. So tomorrow morning when you sit down to eat, ask yourself, am I feeding my eyes or am I starving them? That simple question can make all the difference in keeping your vision sharp, your world bright, and your independence intact. 1. Eggs, nature's multivitamin for your eyes. For decades, eggs carried a bad reputation because of cholesterol. Patients would come to me and say, "Doctor, I cut out eggs years ago because I didn't want to hurt my heart." But the science today tells a very different story. Not only are eggs safe for most older adults, they are one of the most powerful foods you can eat for your eyes. The yolk is where the magic lies. It contains high concentrations of lutein and zeaxanthin, two carotenoids that act like built-in sunglasses. They filter harmful blue light from screens and sunlight, protecting your retina from oxidative stress. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that people who ate just one egg per day for 5 weeks had significantly higher blood levels of these carotenoids compared to those who didn't. Another clinical trial found that consuming eggs regularly improved macular pigment optical density, which is a direct marker of long-term retinal protection. Eggs also provide vitamin A, which is crucial for night vision. Without enough vitamin A, the eyes struggle to adapt in low light, and in severe cases, deficiency can lead to blindness. On top of that, eggs are a rich source of high-quality protein that supports the small muscles controlling eye movement and focus. Think about how often your eyes adjust, from near to far, from bright light to darkness. That constant movement depends on healthy, strong muscles, and protein gives them the support they need. Let me share a story from my practice. Martha, a 72-year-old woman, had given up driving at night because headlights and streetlights created a dangerous blur. She told me she hadn't eaten eggs in over 20 years, convinced they would raise her cholesterol. After we reintroduced 2 soft-boiled eggs into her breakfast 3 times a week, her follow-up exam showed stronger macular pigment density. Within months, she regained the confidence to drive after dark and told me it felt like getting a piece of her freedom back. And Martha is not alone. Another patient, Leonard, age 68, was an avid reader but complained that his eyes tired quickly in the evening. We added scrambled eggs with spinach to his morning meal. Within 6 weeks, he noticed less strain, and his ophthalmologist observed improved retinal health. Sometimes the simplest changes make the biggest difference. Now, here's something worth considering. With so many people glued to digital screens today, even seniors on tablets and smartphones, how often are you giving your eyes the nutrients they need to filter that constant blue light? Could adding a couple of eggs to your weekly routine be the simplest step you take to protect your vision? When it comes to preparation, keep it simple but smart. Scramble them with spinach or kale to double the eye-protecting antioxidants. Boil them for a quick snack, or enjoy a veggie-packed omelet. Just try not to overcook them. The lutein and zeaxanthin are most bioavailable when the yolk is still a bit soft. And if you're someone who worries about cholesterol, remember that the 2015-2020 dietary guidelines for Americans removed the daily cholesterol limit, acknowledging that eggs in moderation are safe for most healthy adults. So the next time you're planning breakfast, ask yourself, do you want to start the day with something that simply fills your stomach, or with a food that can literally help keep your world brighter and clearer for years to come? Eggs might just be the easiest choice you can make for your eyes. 2. Spinach and kale, the leafy green protectors. If eggs are nature's multivitamin, then spinach and kale are nature's shield, and for good reason. These leafy greens are packed with lutein and zeaxanthin, the same antioxidants found in the retina that protect against harmful blue light and oxidative stress. They also contain beta-carotene, a precursor to vitamin A, which is essential for overall vision health. A well-known Harvard study found that seniors who consumed the highest amount of leafy greens had a 43% lower risk of developing macular degeneration compared to those who ate the least. That kind of protection doesn't come from a pill, it comes from your plate. Spinach and kale also deliver vitamin K, which supports healthy blood clotting and circulation, and magnesium, a mineral that helps relax tiny capillaries that supply oxygen and nutrients to the eyes. Good circulation is vital for eye health, and leafy greens work like fuel for those delicate vessels. Research from the Journal of Ophthalmology has also shown that diets rich in lutein and zeaxanthin not only slow down the progression of macular degeneration, but can also improve visual performance, including contrast sensitivity, your ability to distinguish objects against different backgrounds. In my practice, I've seen remarkable improvements with small, consistent changes. Helen, a 68-year-old patient, came to me with chronic dryness and irritation. Instead of reaching for more eye drops, I suggested adding a kale, banana, and yogurt smoothie to her morning routine. Within weeks, her eyes felt naturally more moist, and her optometrist noticed healthier tear film stability. Another patient, James, 73, was worried about his family history of macular degeneration. He began sautéing spinach with garlic and olive oil 3 mornings a week. At his next checkup, his retinal health had stabilized, and he told me he felt more energy overall, proof that these foods don't just help your eyes but your whole body. Now let me ask you, how often do you truly see green on your breakfast plate? Many people think of vegetables as something for lunch or dinner, but the morning is the perfect time to give your eyes this shield of protection. A smoothie with spinach, kale, and fruit is quick and refreshing. An omelet with a handful of leafy greens not only boosts eye health but also tastes delicious. And here's a tip I always emphasize: pair these greens with a healthy fat such as olive oil, avocado, or nuts, because lutein and zeaxanthin are fat-soluble and absorbed much better this way. So the choice is simple. You can go another day without feeding your eyes what they need, or you can start making these greens part of your morning routine. Your future self, the one who still reads clearly, enjoys sunsets, and recognizes every face in the family photo, will thank you. 3. Blueberries, the antioxidant powerhouse. Blueberries may be small, but when it comes to protecting your vision, they are true giants. Their deep blue color comes from anthocyanins, powerful antioxidants that improve blood flow to the retina, helping this delicate tissue function at its best. These compounds also reduce inflammation and oxidative stress, two of the biggest culprits behind cataracts, glaucoma, and age-related vision decline. In fact, research published in the Nutrients Journal found that older adults who ate blueberries daily had sharper vision in low light and better contrast sensitivity, which can make something as simple as driving at dusk much safer. Blueberries also support brain health, which is closely tied to eye health. Studies show that people who consume berries regularly perform better on memory and cognitive tests. Since the eyes are essentially an extension of the brain, it's no surprise that what helps one often benefits the other. That's why I often tell my patients that blueberries protect not just what you see, but how you think. George, a 75-year-old patient of mine, had been diagnosed with early cataracts. Instead of grabbing pastries each morning, he made the switch to yogurt topped with blueberries and walnuts. Over the course of a year, his cataract progression slowed, and he reported clearer vision than he expected at his age. Another patient, Diane, 70, complained of frequent eye fatigue after long afternoons reading. I encouraged her to replace her afternoon cookie with a small bowl of blueberries. Within a few months, she noticed less strain, and her ophthalmologist confirmed her vision was holding steady. It's worth asking yourself, when you reach for a snack or plan your breakfast, are you choosing foods that slowly erode your eye health, or are you choosing ones that strengthen it? Blueberries are an easy win. They don't require preparation beyond a rinse, and even frozen varieties retain nearly all of their nutritional value. The best way to enjoy them is to keep things simple. Add a handful to your oatmeal, sprinkle them over yogurt, or mix them into a bowl of whole-grain cereal. Pairing them with nuts or seeds adds healthy fats that can enhance nutrient absorption. They're sweet, convenient, and satisfying without the sugar crash that often follows pastries or processed snacks. Making blueberries part of your daily routine isn't just about adding fruit. It's about making a conscious choice to protect your vision, support your brain, and keep your energy stable throughout the day. That's a small habit with a big payoff. 4. Carrots, the classic vision food with a twist. Carrots have long been linked to vision health, and while it may sound like an old saying, modern science continues to confirm just how valuable they are for the eyes. They are rich in beta-carotene, a plant pigment that the body converts into vitamin A, a nutrient essential for the function of the retina and particularly important for night vision. Without adequate vitamin A, the eye struggles to adjust in dim light, and severe deficiency can even lead to complete blindness. Globally, the World Health Organization reports that vitamin A deficiency is still one of the leading causes of preventable blindness, especially in older adults. Research has also shown that the benefits of carrots extend beyond preventing deficiency. A large-scale study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that individuals with higher beta-carotene intake had a 40% lower risk of developing age-related macular degeneration. Another study in the archives of ophthalmology linked regular consumption of beta-carotene-rich foods with a slower decline in visual acuity among seniors. This tells us that carrots are not just about preventing blindness. They play a role in keeping vision clearer for longer. I recall Mrs. Anderson, a 70-year-old patient who struggled to read in low light, often avoiding her evening Bible study because her eyes simply couldn't adapt. We introduced a simple change, roasting carrots with olive oil twice a week. Within a few months, her ability to see in dim light improved, and she returned to her evening reading with confidence. Another patient, Harold, 74, had early signs of macular degeneration. Along with other dietary changes, he began juicing carrots with apples and ginger 3 mornings a week. Over the following year, his condition stabilized, and he reported fewer difficulties with glare while driving. So here's something worth reflecting on. How often are you giving your eyes this simple but powerful source of nourishment? Carrots are inexpensive, widely available, and versatile. Roasting them with olive oil enhances the absorption of beta-carotene since it's fat-soluble. Shredding them into oatmeal muffins or mixing them into soups is another easy way to enjoy them. Fresh carrot juice combined with apples and a touch of ginger makes a refreshing morning drink that supports your eyes as well as your immune system. Carrots may be classic, but they remain one of the most reliable foods for eye health. The twist is that you don't need large amounts. Just steady, consistent intake as part of your weekly diet can make a meaningful difference in how well your eyes age. So the real question is, are carrots finding their way onto your plate often enough to give your eyes the support they deserve? 5. Salmon, the omega-3 eye saver. Your retina is one of the most metabolically active tissues in the body, and it depends heavily on omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA, as a structural building block. Without enough DHA, vision can become blurry, dry eyes worsen, and the risk of age-related eye disease increases. Salmon is one of the richest natural sources of both DHA and EPA, and research consistently shows its benefits. According to the American Academy of Ophthalmology, seniors who consume fatty fish like salmon at least twice a week reduce their risk of developing advanced macular degeneration by as much as 45%. That's a nearly 50-50 chance between maintaining sight and losing it, a difference too significant to ignore. Omega-3 also reduce inflammation in the meibomian glands, the tiny oil glands in your eyelids that keep tears from evaporating too quickly. When these glands are inflamed, eyes dry out, causing burning, itching, or that constant need for artificial tears. I've seen many patients gain relief just by adding salmon into their weekly diet. Paul, a 66-year-old patient, had relied on eye drops multiple times a day for years. Once he began eating salmon twice a week, sometimes smoked on whole-grain toast, other times folded into an omelet, his dry eye symptoms decreased by half, and he was no longer tied to carrying drops everywhere he went. The benefits of salmon extend beyond eye comfort. A study in investigative ophthalmology and visual science found that people with higher dietary omega-3 intake were significantly less likely to show early signs of diabetic retinopathy, a major cause of blindness in older adults. Another clinical trial published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition revealed that omega-3 supplementation improved tear stability and comfort in patients with chronic dry eye. These findings reinforce what I've seen in practice. Consistent omega-3 intake is a game changer for aging eyes. Now let me ask you, when was the last time salmon made it onto your plate? For many, fish is a dinner choice at best, but including it earlier in the day can make all the difference. Smoked salmon paired with avocado on whole-grain toast makes for a nutrient-packed breakfast. A salmon and spinach omelet not only provides omega-3, but also combines them with the protective carotenoids from leafy greens. Even flaking leftover grilled salmon into a salad is a simple way to give your eyes the fuel they need. The key is consistency, not perfection. You don't need salmon every day, but aiming for 2 to 3 servings a week can dramatically reduce your risk of eye disease while keeping your vision sharper and more comfortable. So when you think about your weekly meals, ask yourself, are you giving your eyes enough of the omega-3 support they need to keep working for you well into the future? 6. Walnuts, the brain and eye connector. Most people think of walnuts as a food for the heart or the brain, but few realize how powerful they are for the eyes. Walnuts are high in alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that supports healthy circulation. Good blood flow is critical for delivering oxygen and nutrients to the retina, which is one of the most energy-hungry tissues in the body. They are also rich in vitamin E, a potent antioxidant shown in large studies to slow the progression of cataracts by as much as 25%. That protection is especially important as cataracts remain one of the leading causes of vision loss worldwide. What makes walnuts unique is that they support both the brain and the eyes, which is no coincidence since the eyes are, in fact, an extension of the brain. Nourishing one naturally benefits the other. I've seen these effects in practice. Janet, age 69, began eating a small handful of walnuts with her oatmeal each morning. Over the course of a year, her eye exams showed stable vision, and she told me she felt mentally sharper and more engaged in conversations with her family. Another patient, Robert, 72, had a history of cataracts and early signs of cognitive decline. By making walnuts a daily habit, mixed into a smoothie or eaten as an afternoon snack, he not only stabilized his vision, but also reported better memory and focus during his follow-up visits. These are not isolated stories. They reflect what the research continues to confirm. Studies from the Journal of Nutrition, Health and Aging have shown that regular walnut consumption is linked to better cognitive function in older adults, while findings in ophthalmology highlight their role in slowing age-related vision problems. So let me ask you this. If a single, affordable food could protect both your eyesight and your memory, why wouldn't you make it part of your routine? Walnuts are easy to add to just about anything. Sprinkle them over cereal or yogurt, blend them into smoothies, or simply enjoy a handful as a snack. The key is consistency. A small serving each day is enough to deliver powerful benefits without overwhelming your diet. With every handful, you're giving your brain and your eyes a boost, helping you see clearly, think clearly, and live more fully as the years go by. So let's take a moment to recap. We've talked about 6 simple morning foods: eggs, spinach and kale, blueberries, carrots, salmon, and walnuts. Together, they deliver the exact nutrients your eyes need to stay sharp, hydrated, and protected against the most common age-related problems. These aren't expensive supplements or complicated treatments. They're everyday foods that can change the way you see the world. Now ask yourself this: are you going to let your eyesight slowly fade with age, or are you ready to take charge by making these small but powerful changes to your morning routine? Remember, your eyes aren't just windows to the world, they're windows to your independence, your freedom, and your quality of life. If this video gave you something valuable, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next set of life-changing tips. Every click helps us reach more people who deserve to age with clarity, confidence, and health. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care of your eyes, take care of your health, and I'll see you in the next video.